Hi, this is Garth. We're going to look at rules today. We're going to start with a empty part file. I have a new geometrical set. I'm going to call this one base geometry. What we're really going to do is set up a similar box module to what we've done in previous tutorials. Looks like I'm in the wrong workbench. I'm going to go into generative shape design. Alright, let's get out some of the tools we need. We need a wireframe. We'll need surfaces and operations. Alright, so let's just make a really simple box. Start with a point at 0, 0, 0. Call this base point. And let's make a point at -1, -1. And for Z, let's do -0.05. Get it out of the way. And again, to rename these, I'm pressing Alt-Enter when they're highlighted. And this will be the attractor point. Okay. Zoom in on these a little bit. Alright, now let's insert a new geometrical set. We'll call this module. Again, this is no different than what we've done before. It's actually going to be even simpler geometry. We're going to make a line, choose point direction. Our point is going to be our base point. Our direction can be the YZ plane. And let's just make its end at 1 millimeter. Okay, now let's make an extrude. We're going to extrude that line. Direction will be the ZX plane. And we'll just make that in one direction too, at 1 millimeter. Alright, now we'll make another extrude. Profile will be the surface we just made. Direction will be the XY plane, and that will again be just 1 millimeter. Alright, now just to go over what we had done before in a really simple way. We want to tie the height of this box to the distance between the attractor point and the base point. We went down to this little f of x to create a parameter, new parameter of type length. Click that button to make sure it gets created. And press OK. So now we have our length parameter. We'll just leave it called length because we're going to let it represent a couple different things as we go. And if we double click, we can change the value. Just make it 1 millimeter. Let's make now this length be driven by this distance. And we'll do that just like we did before. I'm just going to hide this line and extrude, so all we have is our box. Alright, so when we double click this parameter, we can right click, go to Edit Formula, and now if you need to consult these equations, you can scroll through here, find measures, double click on this distance, and then you can double click the base point, double click the attractor point. So now that parameter is measuring that distance. And now for our extrude 2, if we double click that definition, go into this limit 1 parameter, edit formula, and then we just click on length 1. So now that parameter is driving the height of the box. We'll double check on that by moving our attractor point around and watching the box change height. And that parameter is in turn driven by the distance from the base point to the attractor point. So that set up these two relations, and what we did before is drag those relations into our module and call that the end of our module. Now what we're going to do now is actually control those relations with a rule instead of these formulas. So I'm just going to click on these formulas and delete them. So again, our attractor point is now just free. It's not controlling anything. This box height is whatever it was where we left off, but now we're going to actually go into another workbench just to fetch out our rule. So if you go to Start, Knowledge Where, Knowledge Advisor, you'll see this new set of commands on the right. This one right here is a rule. So I'm going to click on that and ask you to put a name. We'll just call it My Rule for now, and we'll press OK. And then it actually opens the rule editor right away. But if you just press OK, you end up with My Rule. It's in Relations, and at any point you can just double click it to go back in there. Now just to show you, if you go to Start and go back to Generative Shape Design, anytime you double click the rule, you're back in the Knowledge Advisor workbench. And actually, I think if you then double click Geometry, yeah, I just double clicked Base Point and you go back into Generative Shape Design. So you can just double click on stuff in your scene to move between those two workbenches instead of having to go through this menu. Okay, so now we're going to use this rule to do what the two equations had been doing. I'm sorry, the two formulas had been doing. Okay, so within this rule, and this is really simple syntax again, we're going to say that this length 1 parameter, and if you just click on it once, it plugs it in. And we're going to say that that's going to equal, again, we can go down to measures and reference this distance here, double click that distance, and now we're putting that in just like we'd put in a formula that we did before. So now this length 1 is going to equal that distance. If we move our attractor point, our length 1 isn't quite working yet. Let's go see what we did wrong there. I'm not sure. Now it seems like it's working. So if I double click that attractor point, I'm double clicking twice here because the first time I double click it's taking me back into the Generative Shape Design workbench. The second time I double click it's actually opening up. So as I'm moving this attractor point, I'm not seeing that length move, but when I double click that rule and then hit OK, it's actually setting it back up. I'm not sure why we have that slow response right now, but let's keep going and we'll see what's happening. So let's set, I'm going to double click this. Actually, that was wrong. I'll delete that. I'm going to double click this limit 1. So open up your extrude, go into the limit 1, and this one. And we can set that equal to that parameter. Okay, so now everything seems to be in working order. If we double click our attractor point, we can move it around, and now that rule is driving everything rather than having those formulas in relations. We just have this one rule, and that rule is setting this length parameter equal to the distance from the base point to the attractor point, and it's setting this limit 1 of the extrude. And you can see as I click on this stuff in the rule editor, it'll highlight it in the scene. So this limit 1 of the extrude is equal to that length parameter. Now we can also put in a factor like we did before, and we can do that two ways. You can either just write it right into the rule. So you can say that this length 1 is the distance from the base point to the attractor point, and then you can just divide it out by some factor, say 3. Or the other thing you could do is make a new parameter of type real. Again, make sure you click on that button to make the parameter. And I'm going to Alt-Enter and call this factor. And we can go back into our rule and instead of R3, I'm going to delete the 3 and just click on factor. It's going to give me an error because that factor is 0. So I'll just accept that, and then I'll go back and double click. And again, double clicking that first time is switching between the workbenches. Then I'll double click again. Let's change it to 2 now. So opening my rule again, we see how this again is just driving everything. There's no new formulas popping up in relations. So we will actually drag this rule into the module, and now we have the module working the same way, but it's driven by a rule instead of formulas.